Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back, y'all. Dr. Nicole Truesdell here. As always, I'm your host and guide for this podcast, Abolitionist Dreamscape. So welcome. All right, y'all. I know it's been a while. It's been a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I'm here. You're here. We're here together. And guess what? It's season 3, episode 21. And they say that when you're doing a podcast, many people stop before they get to episode 21. And that's when you can really see the sustainability and longevity of podcasts. And so I'm here. I'm committed. You're committed. And let's do this thing. Okay. So this season, what I want to do is focus on stories from the margins. Now, if you've joined me for the duration of this podcast, season 1, I was talking a lot about my own abolition of my life. I'm talking about how I came into the realization that I needed to leave academia, realizing that I was actually a lesbian, very gay at 40, which led me to not only leaving my marriage, but also moving and having to really re-understand who I was in middle age. And so season 1 really talks a lot about that. I bring astrology in at the end with Laura Chung. And then in season 2, I move on to the idea of the crossroads, because when you break your life, you end up being at these crossroads of life. What is next? What comes next? What is possible? So season 2, throughout the 10 episodes, I'm talking mainly with a lot of other people about the various crossroads of their life and the ways that they are trying to navigate and make sense of the nonsense that we call society. And again, I bring astrology in as well with that. And me and Laura Chung and I had a great conversation again in season 2 about the crossroads of astrological middle age. And so that got me thinking, and at the end of that season, it was really a wrap up, got me thinking about then what to bring to season 3. And to me, it's how we dreaming. How do we dream? And so we dream many times by stories that we hear and stories that we tell and stories that we create. So why not focus on stories from the margins? That's what I want to do this season. So I've got a great lineup of guests for you all to engage with and listen to that I'm excited to be talking to, along with my own one-on-one. So don't worry, it's going to be me and you sometimes. Next episode, so it's going to be me and you. Me and y'all talking about some of the things that are coming up for me, my own stories, especially stories from when I was in higher ed, but also stories, some of the stories that I'm also thinking about and creating. So stay tuned for that. But this episode, I wanted to bring on somebody who is very dear to me, a former colleague, now collaborator, a friend, and somebody who is also family, Dr. Moya Bailey. And Moya and I met, I want to say probably 8 or so plus years ago. We talk about it at the very beginning of our conversation of how we did meet. But Moya is somebody who is somebody I consider a dreamer, somebody who plays with the dreamscapes and doesn't allow the kind of constructions of who people think she is to really define how she sees herself and the way that that then dictates how she moves in the world. It's beautiful. I love how Moya moves in the world. And I thought it'd be great to have a conversation with her about what does it mean to gather people together right now in this moment? What does it mean to really bring folks together in what we call community at a time in which we are also experiencing the highest forms of loneliness and at the same time the most forms of interconnectivity? So what is the conundrum and how do we work through that, right? And that's really a big part of my own work when I talk about strategic dreaming through both my strategy firm, Truesdell Associates, LLC, which is a boutique strategic dreaming firm that works with individuals and organizations to help build these containers of incubation that allows folks to not just dream, but to first sit in their realities by sitting in the body and getting into the body and allowing yourselves to center you as the margin of where you many times do not allow yourself to be. And then if you believed your reality and took back your time, then what is possible? What can you dream? And that to me is strategizing with our dreams, because it allows us to break structures, break policies, break relationships that aren't actually allowing us to get to what we say we want, which is freedom and liberation. So what the hell does that mean, though? We have to redefine that for ourselves. So Moya is somebody that also engages with this kind of strategic dreaming in her own way, with the kind of work she does alongside the research that she engages in, because Moya is the person who, along with Trudy, coined the term misogynoir based upon not only their experiences personally, but also the ways in which they were reading the socio-political, economic, and archival landscapes, right? And so when you're kind of creating things and you are the first, you have to sit in your dreamscapes. You have to believe your visions. You have to believe the things that don't seem possible, but are also the only things that make the most sense. So whose logic are you using and why? And this is why I want to be able to talk with others who aren't afraid to sit in those dreamscapes, who aren't afraid to draw upon stories in different locations of history as a way to reimagine what futures could be in the present. We need that kind of Neptunian energy that is channeled in ways that allows us to also remember that we have feet, right? So therefore, being in the body, how do we bring that kind of higher octave of Venus, which is the Neptunian energy of story making and storytelling and the glamour and the like, and that allows us to recreate the structures that will actually make sense for us this Pluto and Aquarius time. So don't worry about the astrology if you don't know that. I'm having another conversation with Laura later on this season. We're going to get into that and more. So what I'm going to do now real quick is read Moya's biography, and then we will turn it over to the interview. So Moya Bailey is a professor at Northwestern University, the founder of the Digital Apothecary, and co-founder of the Black Feminist Health Science Studies Collective. Her work focuses on marginalized groups' use of digital media to promote social justice, and she is interested in how race, gender, and sexuality are represented in media and medicine. She is a digital alchemist with the Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network and the board president of Allied Media Projects, a Detroit-based movement media organization that supports an ever-growing network of activists and organizers. She's a co-author of #Activism, Networks of Race and Gender Justice out of MIT Press 2020, and is the author of Misogynoir Transformed, Black Women's Digital Resistance out of New York University Press 2021. And she is the producer and director for the forthcoming documentary, Misogynoir in Medicine. And if you're interested to learn more about how to strategically dream, what it means to come back and embody your reality, to take back your time, and you want to do so in a incubated, contained space, check out my Patreon, Abolitionist Dreamscapes. I got a lot more things that I've introduced over the past month and will be introducing going forward in the fall. And one of them is a dream incubator that I host monthly on the Patreon, the Landscapes Here and Higher. And I will be having more exercises and activities and events forthcoming in my Patreon. So for more, please check out there along with my website, drnicoletruesdell.com, for my strategy firm. And let's get to the interview. Hey folks, welcome back. Dr. Nicole Truesdell here. I am finally back, and I am here this time with my friend, my sister, my former colleague who is now a collaborator, Dr. Moya Bailey. Hello, Moya.
Hello, it's so good to be here.
Yes, it's so good to have you. So for folks who don't know, because you wouldn't know because I ain't talked about it, I've known Moya for a few years now. We first came together, honestly, because we remember it a little bit differently, but we came together because of NWSA, right? Like National Women's Studies Association.
No, Future of Minority Studies. I mean, I'm sorry. That all strong and I was wrong. No.
Girl.
Carrie Ann Rockmore. What was that? FS. It's another acronym. Faculty Success Program. FSP.
FSP. That's right. We met actually, funny enough, on the phone and it's funny because you do all the work you do around research, right? It's like the research around with social media and digital spaces, and we actually met digitally, old school on the phone, because we were in the same pod together. We were in a community group. That's right. We were in that community group. I always forget that. I always think it's NWSA, but it was actually Carrie Ann's faculty.
Yes, that was the first time that we met in person, but we had already built, I think, a good foundation of connection through that digital space. So just to say, I do think people can make friends and have community online. I do think it's harder now, but we definitely did it.
We did, and it was a good few months too before we could meet in public. So that's right. We did. We literally built first online without even seeing each other, and then we finally met in person, and it was love at first sight, you know. But we had had that foundation, right? And so I wanted to bring Moya on, have a conversation actually about this, about what does it mean to gather, what does it mean to come together, especially in this moment. And for folks who don't know, I had given the intro, I gave Dr. Bailey, put some respect on her name, but I gave him Moya's full bio earlier in the episode. But Moya's work is really, Moya is known for her work in the digital space, in particular talking about misogynoir, talking about the ways in which being both labeled as Black and a woman collide in particular ways through the Black woman's body. And what does that mean then for, Black womanhood itself to be even seen within these racial capitalist spaces? And this is how I interpret Moya's work with the lens of misogynoir. But in particular, then, what does it mean for folks to come together under these identities, right, that we also know are heavily policed and surveillanced? And so Moya's work is amazing. It works with digital spaces, works with on the ground, but also at the same time that a lot of Moya's work is used within community to think about what is it being to build community. I feel like because of the ways that Black women's bodies are also seen as sites of commodities, receptacles of just taking, there's a way that folks really don't know you. And so I wanted to make space and be like, who is Moya? And what does it mean for Moya to think about gathering, to think about coming together, right? And what does it truly mean to build community now when, just like you said, we are so more online than ever, but it's not really necessarily going to be online that we can start to truly build the spaces we need. So, Moya, what do you think about all that?
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. I think one of the things I'm working on as a professor is trying to give my students practical skills for the world we claim to want. And the academy isn't really set up to offer that. So I try to teach in such a way that brings and makes possible the soft skills, as they're often called, kind of in a derogatory way, but the things of communication and how do you hold space? How do you deal with conflict? Those kinds of things that are hard and definitely were hard for me to learn. And not anything I could really learn outside of being in physical community with each other. It's a different thing in this moment of the internet and influencer culture. The kind of way that people communicate is not often as peers. And so I'm really interested in some of those ways that we learn to connect with each other peer to peer. And it's interesting because when I was a kid, I was in this thing called peer helping. So this is middle school now. So as a middle schooler, peer helpers were something implemented. Actually, this is pretty transgressive now that I think about it. But basically, in middle school, junior high, if you were having a problem, you could have a peer pull you out of class for 15 to 20 minutes, and you could talk with a peer counselor who was trained to help you kind of deal with whatever was going on in your life. And so we had these things about confidentiality and also reporting. So if you were going to harm yourself or harm someone else, you had to tell an adult. But it actually, I think, did a lot to create, at least in our school, some opportunities for people who are really going through it to bring this to the fore. And there was an annual peer helper conference that happened every year. And I was responsible one year for helping to coordinate it. And so these little things, and I'm talking, this is Arkansas, y'all. So this is mostly white and rural and a little bit racist and a lot racist also, all at the same time. And also kids who parents work with the university. It's a mix, right? It's a mix of people. And I think that was kind of my early introduction into thinking about how we relate to each other, how we gather together in ways that are more designed to create the context and kind of world we want, as opposed to punitive and punishing.
And that's actually really, honestly, an amazing program to put into a such a young age, because nowadays we get told that children don't have any capacity, right, to be able to lead one another. When in actuality, like you said, this kind of peer connection, I think, is really important. We don't realize we learn the most from those who are around us, who are our same generation, right, who are our same kind of class. It's like when I used to teach, I used to tell grad students all the time, please don't look up, look around you, because that's who your colleagues are going to be, that's who your networks are going to be. If you keep looking up, they're going to eventually leave, and who is actually your people. But we forget about the peer thing a lot.
No, and honestly, you're also friends with my friend Whitney Peoples, who was one of the people who really helped me when I was in graduate school. I definitely feel like we got our PhDs, out the mud. Like we did that together as peers, not having a lot of support by looking up, and wanting to do things in a new way. We were students who came into women's studies programs because we were so radicalized by the women's studies that we got from our undergraduate institutions. And then we came into the academy where we found that really women's studies, at least as we experienced it, held a lot of people who had come to women's studies later, partially from being pushed out of more traditional disciplines and feeling alienated by their colleagues, which is a very different position than folks who were radicalized by women's studies content and wanting to have a political voice and making a political stand in terms of the PhD that we wanted to get, which at the time it was such a narrative around this. You are making a decision to get a degree in a field that's not very old, a field that's interdisciplinary. What are the job prospects of that? And something that happened to a lot of us early on is that we didn't find ourselves in women's studies programs, that there was a preference actually for people who had traditional disciplinary training and that had women's studies as an add-on. So it's been a real road in terms of trying to figure out our place in the academy, and also our place given the values and principles that we come from, not being really reflected in a lot of the places we work.
And well, at the same time, and I think that's a really important thing to note. I don't think people really understand that history, right, within the academy, because it's so many of the kind of concepts and theories, very much like the one you and Trudy created, right, with misogynoir as one prime example, were created through through that kind of disciplinary lens. So it's more popularized and consumed by the public, making it seem as if feminine women and gender studies is this like very popular, or very like what do the conservatives always say, wokeness that is infiltrating everything. And it's like, shit, I wish I used to give my students to at least read a whole article. That was my radicalness. Can you read the whole damn thing so we can have a conversation, right? But really it comes down to, even within the so-called spaces of innovation, right, with the academy, it's actually very reductive and reproductive. It wants the same thing over and over again, right? So there's a way that, and I know Whitney, it's funny because so Moya mentioned Whitney. It's so funny. I met Moya first through the phone, but I met Whitney separately when I was trying to actually get her to work with me. And that didn't happen. But then after all of that, we ended up realizing that they knew each other. I was trying to go to NWSA in Montreal. That's what it was. And then we finally all met together in person. So it's also this idea, it's been interesting because it was actually through the disciplines that helped us gather together. Because I, as an anthropologist, right, I was a four-field anthropologist. So I went from biological into sociocultural, even though it was it's the same damn discipline, y'all. It's the same damn discipline. You thought I would have went from fucking math all the way to Greek philosophy. Like shit. Like it did my head in, right? Like so imagine what Moya is saying when you're just doing a whole new discipline. My shit is the colonial. Like I'm doing the master's discipline. And the shit I changed too much. So it was interesting, all three of us being in these kind of outskirts of the disciplines helped us gather together, right? At a space that was made for those who did not fit NWSA.
That is such an excellent point. I definitely feel like that is the story of my life. My mom has said that I collect strays. That's kind of how she has described, like, lovingly and also shadily talked about my friends, you know? Like, I do think that I have always been a little bit on the outside of things. And so part of my interest in gathering and creating space is trying to create spaces that can hold people who aren't traditionally held in other ways, in other places. And thinking about women's studies, you know, women's studies as an academic discipline, you know, had these lofty aims, but I think the disciplining of the disciplines means that sometimes it can slip and become what it was trying to critique. And this is true of the digital as well. You know, I definitely felt like our early online community organizing was this peer to peer, real network gathering and space of cross pollination. But now it's so much invested in, you know, who created what, influencer culture, having a platform, having followers, like all of that language is something that I think is very different. Mariam Kaba and I had a talk in relationship to my book, and that was one of the things Mariam brought up, was that we had this shift when we started using the language of followers and influencers, that peer-to-peer experience of being online was totally undone. And I do think that that is kind of the difference from kind of these early days of online organizing that were more horizontal than the hierarchy that we have now.
And isn't that interesting? Because even when we don't want to, even when people say they don't want hierarchy, especially in justice spaces that are, you have to engage with social media, we see even a redoubling down of hierarchy because of exactly what you're saying. It just shifted. I think we think of hierarchy in a very traditional state way, but we don't realize that the energy of oppression knows how to maneuver itself. So now we have influencers and follower accounts and stuff like that. And so now your influence somehow dictates your knowledge versus actually your background in knowing and experience of actually doing, right? And something I thought about when you were talking too, because I think about this idea of privacy. We lost privacy as we got more digitally connected, whereas at the beginning the digital actually was still another private sphere. Is that right? Is that accurate to say, Moya?
No, I think you're exactly right. Like, even though these conversations were happening in the quote unquote public sphere, they were happening in ways that were a bit under the radar for a lot of people. But once corporations saw the power and potential of social media, it really ratcheted everything up. It became this space that was another way to brand and to market to people. In those early days, we were talking about ideas. We'd have like deep conversations about questions. And something that I really think started and was possible was a lot more women and non-binary, you know, gender expansive folks identifying as feminist. You know, I came up in undergraduate school where feminism was a bad word. People talked about it as the F word. Like, I'm not a feminist. Don't put that label on me. Also, you know, in those early days, people weren't even really doing the womanist thing. Womanism was definitely better, but still was like a little too much for people. Now, I think people use those terms freely. It's a very different, it's a very different place. And of course, you know, we still have a lot of work to do around feminism, but it's a different world than it was, even 10 years ago, which is wild. I mean, that is something I can say about the power of social media. And though, then these things become labels and identities, and they're not really rooted in practice or praxis. So when I think of that, though, part of my feminism was very much being in community with other people who identified as feminists, but also were doing feminist work, right? So even people who didn't identify as feminist, it was how we were organizing together, whether that was on campus and trying to address, some of the sexual harassment that was happening. I went to Spelman College, and right next door is Morehouse. So there were always these questions about, sexual harassment between the two institutions. Then there was also the question of homophobia happening in different places. And so being a feminist actually meant doing some things. It meant aligning yourself with some of these issues and not just something that you declared about yourself. And so I think we're in a very different moment where identity gets to matter to people a bit more than actual behavior.
Oh, Moya, you got okay. Now we're gonna get into it, y'all, because you have no idea how much I've been thinking about this to myself. Child, I've been thinking about this to myself. So, like, let's it's because the thing is, it turned from an action into an aesthetic, right? And if you think about what you said with Miriam about this idea, the follower count, the influence, we have to realize that these systems, these energies are so good at transmuting and figuring out a new way to reinforce themselves, right? And so I think right now we are seeing the limitations of identity. I'm not talking about identity politics, Sean. I'm talking about the politics of identity. We are seeing the politics of identity play out through a nation state, and people rather want to be labeled something versus understanding that that is not a noun, it's a verb, it's an action. You got to do some shit. If you were a feminist back in the day, you were doing some shit. If you were a radical, you probably didn't call yourself that. It's because you did some shit. I remember my postdoc, I'm not going to say their name, but the postdoc that you've met before too, this person shocked the shit out of me because they were old school. They're trans man, feminist though, like where it was out in San Fran. All of a sudden one day they were like, yeah, when I was in jail that one time, I said, excuse me? Well, yeah, we got arrested all the time because, we were always doing these actions because we were trying to get, folks fed and having them have access to clean needles and stuff, right? It was there was no bravado on it. It was just something that he wasn't even trying to, it just literally came out because we were in a flow. We were smoking some weed and hanging out and just talking, but it was so part of the praxis, right, of the work itself. Now it's more important for folks to know the right term to call themselves and then put that, like, it gives them permission to put themselves in a box so they know how to act. It's like there's a way that we have learned to self-surveillance. We are self-surveillancing now for the state through these identities that we don't realize actually are about action, but we don't want to take action because if you take action and it's not liked, shared, or followed, right, we don't realize that we have been made docile through this so-called like radicalization online. Let me stop. I can go on and on, Moya, but you got my ass go. Yes. So yeah.
No, I'm just hard relate to everything that you're talking about. I mean, this is the difference, I think, between kind of what people see about me versus how I live. Like, I do think that my like inner world, like what I want more than anything is to gather with people who like want to do something. Like we want to change the world. And I know that happens through small groups of people who are committed and who want things to be different. It's not really about what we call ourselves publicly. It's not about that. And that to me is very much the way that neoliberalism has really taken hold in even some parts of the left, where it becomes about my identity, making sure people know my pronouns, etc. And it's not about a larger conversation, which we should be having about what does gender justice look like for all of us? What does it actually mean for us to get our needs met? And what are our expectations of the system itself, not just for me as an individual. And so individualism, I think, is something that we haven't grappled with in the same way. And this is one of the things I talk about a lot too. This is why I think the right is winning in so many ways, because even though they do have a very individualist frame in some ways, they also can be very collective. You know, the way that people have been
Yes.
able to rally and support Trump, even with all of their different actual religious beliefs, speaks to a level of connection that I don't see on the left. There is this outdoing of trying to be more radical than the next person. And I don't see us actually showing up and providing some of those things that people need. So, to your example about your postdoc, I don't see the left doing the kind of needle exchange programs and doing the kind of like deep work that I think was a hallmark of some of our organizing in the past. What do people need? You know, where are we with folks who have real needs that need to be met? And I don't think we're there. I really want us to think about what does it take, where our energy is being expended, and where we might want to redirect it so that we're actually meeting people where they are. I think the class divisions of our world are so much stronger than they've ever been. Again, I don't know how we're doing on the left with that. I do think that even as problematic as a charity model is on the right, I do think that it does create more opportunities for interaction across class. And I see that happening less and less on the left. So I don't know. I'm just really trying to think about what do we actually want our world to look like? And to me, part of that is having the kind of gatherings, the kind of spaces where we model what it is that we actually want on the local level. Like we can actually do the thing of treating each other better and not discarding people, throwing people away because they said the wrong thing. It just makes it harder to want to be in movement and be on the left if you feel like you're going to be cast out because you don't know certain things that you don't know yet. It's not a very welcoming place to make mistakes or to try and join and get that political education.
So then what kind of spaces do you want to gather people through? How do you want to gather people now?
My favorite way to gather people is around food. That is definitely a favorite of mine. I love to feed people. I really like to cook, and I think I'm a good cook. And I definitely think of myself as a kitchen witch. So I think gathering with food, and then also we share a love of astrology, all things esoteric arts. So I love having people over. We just reinstituted kind of a new thing in Chicago, Witchy Wednesdays. So opportunities to kind of do some light coven work as we think about how the stars and, you know, things are impacting us. Also, more than that, just giving people an opportunity to share a bit of their feelings. And I do think, again, sometimes on the left, we can go so hard on the materialist analysis, but ultimately, I think what it comes down to is how we treat each other. And so treating each other is really going to be, to me, the hallmark of what's next in our story as humans.
And see, I think that's a really important point because I still got to get to a Witchy Wednesdays. Y'all, I got a 10-year-old, and I swear these extracurriculars I'm like, what do I have to do now tonight? I thought I could go. No, can't. Got Now you got this one. Shit. That's a side note. That's those who got little ones, you got to take places. Damn, it be taking time. But that was something that was always the kind of that always troubled me when I was in the academy, right? Like, and I talk about this in past episodes, like my kind of former, quote unquote, former life, in which, you know, I had built community around folks because we had the same type of of movement making and movement work, right? And we talked about community and all that stuff. But I realized what was really a stark reality for me was when I was going through the divorce, but also going through the coming out process by my, I felt like very much by myself after leaving the academy to go off on my own. There was a way that I realized not only did I not know, not really not have anybody to go to in which I could open up like that, I didn't even know how to open up like that to people because we were all in these kind of more academic spaces, right? And I even me and you, Moya, right? Like I shut down and like you reached out to me finally and was like, hey, I realized you're in Chicago. How long you been here? 2 years, girl. What do you mean 2 years? A bitch was breaking down, right? I had a breakdown. Like I was in Mariah Carey trying to figure out the self. But also, I think that's something we have to really, I think we really do, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, whether you're in the academy or not, or in organized spaces or not, we have to be honest with the fact that we preach about community and about care and about trust and love, but we don't really know how to practice it many times. Because when we do go down the muck and when shit is breaking and when we are not quote unquote perfect or we can't hold everything, we're that South Node, y'all. When the South Node is too much and you got to let that shit go, right? Can we really enact? And I think I'll be honest with you, Moya is about that life. Like, and I've always said this, and I've always said Moya's been about that life because there is a way that, when we came back around again and talking, you were like, you're like your family. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it goes beyond just the academy, right? It goes beyond just what you do. Like, I care about you. And I think if we're honest, when you go into these kind of, not just academia, you can go into corporate or whatever, the disciplining of what it means to kind of be successful and then embody kind of, especially in academia, what you do, right? I think we end up dehumanizing ourselves to the point that we don't really know how to be in community. And so we got to go back to the food, like when you say bringing food, to the food, to just the interest. What are your interests? Do y'all have interests? Do you have a hobby? It's okay. You ain't got to monetize it, y'all. It ain't got to be on aesthetic. You ain't got to go on Instagram. No one needs to know, right? But is there a way that we can figure out how we come together outside of these kind of performances of identity? You know what I mean?
Performances of identity, I think, is such a great term. It does seem like those are the few places that we are able to connect. And one of the things that people have been talking about lately is the lack of third space. Where are the spaces where you can go and hang out? And I think the pandemic, of course, is part of why it's not safe to gather in the same way. COVID is still very real. I don't know that we're always doing the kinds of things that we can do. Masking, of course, is a simple thing, but we can do more in terms of having air filters and providing people with the things they need. Having events in outdoor spaces, like this is the gift and curse of climate change, right? It's warmer later. We have more opportunities to do things outside than we have had in the past. So I really want us to be creative also in terms of where we get together, how we get together, and the expectation that you have to pay for entry is also one that I think we're shifting. One of the things I really love about the folks who do Party Noir is that no one will be turned away for lack of funds. I really think that's a beautiful model for creating space, creating opportunities for folks to gather. And then thinking through, are there other spaces, ways that we can connect in smaller circles? Because I still think that there's something very awkward in this moment about interacting with each other. It does seem not just because of COVID, but people being able to communicate to each other, talk to each other, little things like, I like your outfit. I'm a Southerner, so I speak. That is me. I love to tell people that I think they look good. And, in a world where that is really only understood as flirting or only understood as like some sort of come on, it's something that I've shied away from because I do think that there's we don't have ways to create platonic connection in a lot of the spaces that we're in. especially queer spaces where the assumption is this is like romantic or, what's the point? I do think that there's a lot of that energy as well. If I'm not romantically interested in you, then I don't understand the point of this conversation. So I want us to also think through that. How do we create spaces where the assumption isn't that connection only matters if it's romantic, that we're actually investing in building the kind of platonic relationships that are going to be essential to us in the world that we claim to want, right? Like in the world that we claim to want, I don't think we're going to have Uber and Lyft and all of these things. I think in the world that we want, there's going to be less automation, more connection, especially with people that are near us. So, how do we build the skills that are required if we're not going to treat people as if they're disposable? If we're not going to treat people as if it could be the next person?
Okay, Libra rising coming out. Libra rising is out of the building, y'all. Miss Moya Bailey, Dr. Bailey's a Libra rising, and this is exactly the energy y'all Libra risings are in right now, realizing that it is more than just the romantic, but it is about the relationships. And the relationships do matter, right? So who's the relationships y'all want to be in and why? And the first one is yourself, when you put yourself in this middle of the scales, right? So, and I think that's a beautiful way to explain, like, it's because it really, when you say you don't want to kind of come off as flirty, it's like, but a flirt is exactly what attracts people to you, right? Like we all flirt, and it's not just flirting romantically. Like you can flirt with life, right? How do we allow ourselves to flirt with life itself? And I think that is the lessons of Venus that we really see through Libra risings, or a Libra stellium, or these strong kind of Taurus Libra energies. And I think that's a beautiful way to kind of talk about it, right? Because how do you gather people together? Well, shit, I want to feel good. It should be a little sexy, a little flirty, right? A little like good food, good drink, a little lighting, some music, right? Like Moya mentioned Party Noir. We went to a party. So Party Noir is a group that's in Chicago, Black, queer, femme focus, who put on really inclusive parties, and really actually inclusive parties in which folks actually dance. And there's and it's facilitated. They have an MC, and I think that's really important too. Is I think that the spaces have to be intentional, and because COVID did break a lot of the initial lockdowns did break a lot of the old ways that we thought we were connecting, and realized we really hadn't been connecting with one another. I also really believe that spaces need more facilitation now. Like people don't know what to do, right? They don't know how to act, don't know what to do, don't know how to say hi. So then what happens if we also make spaces that are more intentional and facilitated, right? Like, so this idea of when you bring folks together, and how do you gather together? I want to do it through music. So I'm doing listening salons at my house. I'm going to do one with some folks, some friends in a couple of weeks, where I'm practicing learning how to mix, y'all. I'm practicing. You're going to get some music from me soon. It's going to be a hot mess, but you're going to get something, y'all. Going to get something. But I think it's really important, because how do we gather? I think we have to go back to the past and how we used to gather, put it in conversation with the present of what is going on now, and then figuring out then what is the remix, the actual 2000s remix we do, right? Because if we give it away fully to what is, and to the power of social media, if we really give it away to technology, right? We also know the ways of technology and how that's been not only created, but also weaponized for a certain algorithm, for a certain perspective. So I don't know what you think about that, Moya, but that's what came up when you were talking.
Yes, I think we have to be really wary of the algorithm. And, as a communication studies scholar now, I think that there's not enough conversation about the dangers of the algorithm. AI is so seductive to people. People really like the idea of automation, of things moving more quickly, more easily. But this shorthand has over and over reproduced the same types of hierarchy and same types of oppression that we see in our world, right? There's that Toni Morrison quote, "Love is never better than the lover." and our technology is never better than us either. So until we do that real work of undoing hierarchy, I don't think we can expect technology to do the work for us that we haven't done ourselves. So I want us to be even more intentional about what it is that we're creating and understanding that it's an extension of us. It can't somehow not reproduce the racism, sexism, the misogynoir, the homophobia, the transphobia that we have in our society, because it is us. And one of the things that I hope we can start to do, especially in this move away from, as you were saying, the politics of identity, is to stop valorizing people who have a lot of money and stop valorizing people who are in positions that we've placed there, who don't really actually do the work, who don't really do the things that create the kind of connections that we want to see and feel. So I am hoping that part of this attention to relationships also gets us away from celebrity culture in our movement spaces, celebrity culture in academia. All of those things, I think, get us a bit away from the world that we actually want, the relationships that we actually want for the kind of world we're dreaming of.
And let's talk about that for a minute, Moya, if you don't mind, because you really had triggered a lot of things great, like boom, boom, boom in my mind, because I think about this idea a lot of the celebrity, especially when it comes to movement making and academia. We talk about as entertainment, and we have the whole Diddy scandal going on, right, in positions of power and stuff. But if we're being honest, we have seen this reckoning off and on again in the academy for a while, with nonstop abusers being named who are canonical in various disciplines, right? And the ways that even as we hear the whispers and know the kind of background stories and stuff, we are still so beholden to canon and those whose names are known, who benefit the institution, right? And I think we have to be honest with ourselves. And I'm not anymore, but I always said this when I was in academia too, especially when you are higher up and you sit in positions of so-called radicalness and power, you have to ask yourself, who gave you that position to call yourself that? Because the location that you are critiquing is also location that gave you your name. So you have to always remember there's a relationship there, right? You have to know your oppressor. And in doing so, can we break that relationship? Then we have to break the relationship we have to not wanting to look at our sacred cows then. Like
Definitely.
This is the thing we have, right? Our sacred cows.
No, I totally agree. And I think this is also the thing that we don't hold well on the left, is that you can be both oppressed and an oppressor. Like those two things are not mutually exclusive. So privilege is not a zero-sum game. And I do think we have operated in some ways where we have assumed that because I am marginalized in these ways, then that makes up or cancels out the privilege I have in other spaces, which is just not true. And this is why relationships matter, because if we're thinking about things relationally, then we can be really clear about the relative power people hold in certain interactions, in certain contexts, right? So it's not saying that as, I don't know, a Black man in the academy are at the peak of the academy. No, but you do have relative power to Black women who are, and non-binary, genderqueer, trans folks who are in the academy as well. Like we do need to think about that. There's still cis privilege. There's still hetero privilege. Those things still matter, even when we think that there is some, people have talked about the way that some people have maybe weaponized identity to, as a get out of jail free card. I can't possibly have caused harm because I am the most harmed given my identities. And this is why relationships matter, and talking about this in the context of the world we want is important, I want to be able to hold people accountable, to say the hard thing to people and not feel like I'm going to be turned away from because I brought up something hard. And I want people to not be scared to be confronted or addressed because they have caused harm and they feel like, oh no, I've caused harm. I'm a terrible person. And now I can't be in community anymore. I do think that we have to figure out that balance and also be honest that there are some people who aren't interested in being accountable. And so we don't need to try and force them into that if that's not where they are, right? So while we're not throwing people away, there are certain people who are making a choice consciously not to participate in any part of an accountability process, etc. So my question is, why are we expending energy there when there are people who are willing and wanting to be in community, and that there needs to be repair, that there needs to be a possibility for restoration, transformation, if we're serious about what we say we're serious about?
But I think that's why those soft skills matter, the quote unquote soft skills, right? Going back to what you said at the very beginning, right? And let's be real, they're only soft skills because they are feminized, but that is the most human things that we need to learn how to do, how to sit in conflict, right? How to have a conversation. Like there's one thing, it was funny, like my kids' school, they go to this small Montessori school that goes up to 8th grade. And it was something we chose because my kids not gender non-conforming and X, Y, and Z, it works for us. The one thing they make the kids do is that every morning, because it's a very small school, a member of staff, either Miss Latanya or Miss Luvia, opens the door up for the kids. The young one has to get out, look them in the eyes, say good morning, shake their hand, and then walk in. Right. And at first I was like, that's a lot of work. Why are they doing that? Then I got it. It's like, oh no, this is another way they're teaching them how to have a conversation, how to look someone in the eye, how to just say hello. Even if you're uncomfortable, it's just a greeting, right? It's a thing we do. And in doing so, when they go to the school, go to the classroom, they then will say hello to their classmate. It's an opening. It's a way just to teach, right? It's another way where they're teaching. And it's a hands-on approach to learning, right? And I think that this is, to me, why we have to stop thinking so much and start dreaming, because we want to be right. We want to do the right things. We want to perform the script of the identity the right way. But we forgot that a lot of all of this is figuring out how to play, how to create with one another. And that's a very messy thing. So this idea of how do we gather, I think is really important right now in ways that aren't about the follows and the likes, but it's really about what does it mean to connect back into feeling again, feeling for ourselves and one another so we can actually open up to each other, right? Because you can't build anything, the left, the right, whatever, you can't build anything, right? If we won't even acknowledge what our needs are. And you don't know what your needs
Definitely.
are unless you see what I'm saying? Unless you're actually in your body and allowing yourself to feel and to express it, right? This is why I say dancing is so important. That's why I'm doing music right now. Like it's one way to get in your body so that you can figure out what you need. So Moya, for you, I'm going to kind of
Yeah.
wrap us up a little bit here. As somebody who her whole life has been a gatherer in one way, shape, or form, right? And I actually want to hear a little bit, maybe we can go a little bit longer. I want to hear a little bit about some of the ways you've gathered in the past that worked for you that maybe you are looking to now. But at the same time, as a gatherer, who gathers you? Who holds you so that it's not just one way?
Yeah, look at you just subtly calling me out at the end of time. I see what you're doing there. I see what you're doing there. This is as an only child, which is also, low key eldest daughter energy. I am working on allowing other people to hold me. That is a challenge for me. It's much easier for me to create the container than to be inside one. So I do think that that's my learning curve. I'm really looking forward to more opportunities to practice being held. That's kind of where I'm at right now. I think that's my journey post 40 is trying to make space for that. One of the ways that I am literally practicing being held is floating. I feel like floating is one of my favorite things. So this is saltwater flotation, like super salinated water that like holds you up and you just drift. It feels like you are being held by nothing, floating in the existence of the universe, space, time. It's such a beautiful feeling. And I think it's making more space for me to try and seek a connection with other humans in a similar way. I think I have gathered in my past from that space of being an only child and like wanting the community of peers that I didn't really have growing up. So when I lived in Atlanta, I was involved in a bunch of different things, including I threw an annual Gemini party, the Gemini Jam in Atlanta for several years. It was quite an affair. If yeah, it was a good time to be a Gemini in Atlanta. Also started along with some other folks, we had this group, Poly People of Color. We were young queers, like don't let Gen Z and Gen Alpha act like they were the first one out in these poly streets. We were too, and figuring it out. And I think having difficult conversations and like figuring out what does it mean to be in relationship in different ways, and also thinking about polyamory and non-monogamy in ways that went beyond sexual partners. Who's my family? Who's my chosen family? Why is it that relationships, particularly romantic relationships, sexual relationships, are often prioritized over other types? What does it mean not to center romantic sexual relationships in your life? How does that change your orientation to the world? And I think those are things that are still very much part of how I view my relationships, how I want to be in the world. I'd also say that gathering has looked like Black queer everything first. And being in Atlanta, that was an easy thing to create in some ways, and then also difficult because I'm saying queer as an umbrella term, but I also mean that politically. And it is the case that a lot of Black queer spaces aren't necessarily queer politically. So I've been thinking a lot about how we sometimes maintain some of these really toxic ideas about masculinity and femininity that end up recreating a lot of the oppression and hierarchy that we see in straight culture that we are sometimes just reinforcing, remixing in equally toxic ways. So even in creating and gathering, I still feel a sense of there's more to be done. There's more possibility there because humans are messy, imperfect, and beautiful. So we're still working it out. And I think we have to really consider why we're so invested in hierarchy, even as we're trying to critique it. One of the things I really love is Octavia Butler's work, and really her thing about humans was humans are really smart, and also humans really love a hierarchy. And those two things together don't play very well. Like there are other animals who have hierarchy, but they're not weaponizing their intelligence at the same time. So that hierarchy works, and it doesn't necessarily lead to violence and ill health for those who aren't at the top of the quote unquote food chain. But I want us to also consider, is there room for us to have different ways of relating to each other and not assign value to that in ways that replicate some of these toxic patterns that we see that end up harming us in so many different ways.
I agree with that, Moya. And it gets me thinking about relationship and how part of it is our arrogance as humans to privilege only our relationship to humans, because I think it really is about, I think, because I mean, thinking about Octavia Butler's work, a lot of it is also our inability to see how nature will always whoop our ass when we don't work with her in one way, shape, or form, right? And I think that we are seeing that right now, right? With the Grand Water Trine brought us 3 hurricanes, right? We are going to see more climate change. We like the waters were so powerful that it reshaped landscape. We are literally seeing the earth reshape itself right now, right? And I think that relationship we have to the land and world around us is really important. Why? And which is why our relationship to technology needs to be re-examined right now. I'm really thinking about your work and a lot of other folks' works, a lot of Black queer folks' works. We're talking about algorithms and the issues with them and environment, because it also sucks so much energy. Like all of this AI is also at a cost. It's not free. It is costing us resources, right? So I think about this idea of third space, which you're saying, Moya, earlier, and this idea of gathering people and not having it at cost. Something I really am liking a lot and I'm playing with as I learn DJing is how you're seeing DJs and other kind of sound creators going back and working with in different environments, in nature, in an elevator, on the street, and then having just whoever's around come together and start to dance. I think that that's a really great example of a template that a lot of people can throw off of you can't ask for third space when it's taken away. They're never going to give it back to you. I always said this with budgets. They're not going to give you back money once they take that shit away. You're going to have to figure out a way to take it back, right? But in a way that's not using the same violence that it was taken from you, because that is what they know, right? So I think what you're saying, Moya, makes so much sense. Like if we're going to learn from, like, instead of us quoting these folks, if we learn from them and think about how does that teach us what it means to gather now, there's a whole lot more possibilities than we really give ourselves credit for, right? So thinking about that and ending with music.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. There was we have a lapse right here, y'all. So there's a little bit of lapse. That's why. Go ahead, Moya. I'm sorry.
No, what you were saying about cost just makes me think about my research. And one of the things that's so interesting is we think about the batteries that power our smart devices, power our cell phones and our computers. And those minerals are usually harvested Democratic Republic of the Congo, often by child miners. And so that is one expensive cost that we don't think about, just the debilitating labor that's required to get these minerals in the first place, but also thinking about the cost in terms of time, geologic time. It takes millions, billions of years to create these minerals that we're using up in just a few years. So think about how long your cell phone lasts, how long your computer lasts. I mean, that is no time, given the time it took to create the minerals that are powering those devices. So when we start thinking about what we want to change, how we want to gather, how we want to move differently, we also have to think about scale and time. What are we doing? What's the energy required? Is that an equal cost to like the energetic, output that was initially there, right? So this isn't transactional. This is a question of how do we get to a more healthy and restorative, reciprocal kind of exchange of energy between the resources we consume and then the resources that support what it is that we want to do. So I'm really thinking about that now. How are we thinking about gathering in ways that don't require us to extract so much from the environment and also perhaps give back? And so your example of DJs, using found space, I think is such a wonderful example of that. What does it mean to be in the places where we are, to transform where we actually are? transform the relationships that are closest to you. Part of this in thinking about gathering is also not just the people who share the identities with you, but the people who are actually closest to you. What does it mean to know your neighbors? How does that change the way that you deal with climate crisis and some of the things that are inevitably going to happen when the electricity grid starts to lose its power, which we've seen happen around the world? What does it mean also to create the kinds of communities? Are we living near each other? Are we willing to make that kind of risk and commitment? People will move for a romantic partner. Will we move for our platonic family? Like, these are things that I've been thinking about when I want us to consider what gathering can mean and how we want to show up for each other.
And y'all, this is an example of Pluto and Libra. We are here to fuck up the relationships we understand in order to transform them into what actually works for us. And on that note, I love you, Moya. On that note, and when we talk about, so we're talking about sound, we're talking about gathering. What's a song for you that encompasses what it means to gather? Give it. What's a song of gathering for you?
So one of the songs of gathering for me is by Tierra Whack. It's called Link, and it is definitely the song of my lab, my digital apothecary lab, as that I have through Northwestern University. And it's like, you can come and build with me. We can build this together. It's like such an affirmation. I love that fucking song. It's so great. So Link by Tierra Whack, I feel like is, for me, such a good gathering, building, just a motivation for the world I want to see.
I love it. Thank you, Moya. And so for those who are listening, I give it to you. What is a song for you that is about gathering? All right. And if you are listening to the podcast this season, we're going to be talking about stories from the margins, as I mentioned in the intro. And I'm going to be gathering the soundscapes, the songs of my guests for each one. And at the end of the season, there'll be a playlist that will encompass this season's essence of what it means to have stories for the margins. And I think for me, it's a way I want to archive people's soundscapes as we are trying to figure out what kind of realities we want in the present through the dreamscape. So I want to thank you, Moya, for sharing your his stories and also your dreams with us today about what it really does mean to gather.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
No problem. And y'all, please check out the show notes below. I will have all the links to the various projects that Dr. Bailey Moya has, along with the song link, if you want to listen to that song directly. And as always, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it's through our dreamscapes that we can create the realities we say we want in the present. Till next time, y'all.